I never thought my own son could pull something like this on me. Imagine being 68, independent, fiercely proud, and suddenly realizing you might have been tricked into signing away your freedom, without even knowing it. That's exactly where I was that morning as I sat in my car, gripping the steering wheel tighter than I ever had in my life. My son, David, 40, smiled at me from the passenger seat, but it was one of those smiles that didn't quite reach his eyes, the kind that makes you uneasy without knowing why. "Mom, we're just going to look," he said, his voice a little too cheerful. Just to look. That was his excuse. But my gut told me something else entirely. But before we continue, please subscribe and turn on the notification bell for updates. I watched him carefully as we drove through town. The sun was bright, but somehow the light felt harsh, exposing every crack in my trust. David had always been a little mischievous, nothing cruel, just clever enough to catch me off guard. But this felt different. He wasn't joking. He was serious. And that smile, that constant, unnerving smile, told me I was about to walk into something I couldn't take back. When we arrived, the retirement home looked normal enough from the outside. Manicured lawns, the faint sound of laughter and music drifting out, the smell of freshly baked bread from the kitchen. But the moment we walked in, something shifted. The receptionist, a young woman named Julia, looked up and said my full name, Mary Thompson, like she had been waiting for me. I laughed nervously. "There must be some mistake," I said, handing over my driver's license as if that could correct the error. David avoided my gaze entirely. His eyes were fixed somewhere behind me, somewhere I couldn't see. Then the director appeared. Mr. Howard, mid-50s, with a warm smile and a clipboard in hand, looked me straight in the eye. "We received the deposit yesterday," he said. My laugh caught in my throat. "Deposit? But I didn't," I stammered. I reached for the contract on the desk, and that's when my blood ran cold. The signature on the page wasn't mine. It looked almost like mine, but not exactly. My son had done this. My independent life, my freedom, had been manipulated while I trusted him. And yet, he still smiled, as if he had just pulled off the greatest trick in the world. I took a shaky breath. "David, what is going on?" I asked, my voice trembling. But he didn't answer. And in that moment, I realized that what I thought would be a harmless tour of a retirement home was about to spiral into something far more shocking, something I could never have predicted. But what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. I thought the moment we walked through the front doors would be the weirdest part of the day. I was wrong. Every step we took down the polished hallways of the retirement home made my heart pound a little faster. The walls were lined with framed photos of smiling residents, cheerful messages about activities, and neatly labeled doors. But something about it felt too familiar. Like I had been here before. Or like someone had planned this day down to the smallest detail. I glanced at David, trying to read him. He kept that same unnerving smile plastered on his face, and the more I looked, the more I felt the rising tension knotting in my stomach. "Mom, this is the fitness center. They have yoga classes 3 times a week." "You'd love it," David said, pointing to a bright, airy room with sunlight streaming through large windows. I raised an eyebrow. "Yoga? I haven't even thought about yoga in years." "How do you even know I like yoga?" His smile didn't falter. Instead, he said, "Just pay attention. You'll see." His cryptic answer only made me more suspicious. I felt my pulse quicken, but I forced a laugh to hide my unease. "Well, I guess it could be fun," I muttered, stepping inside. Residents waved at us as we walked past. Some seemed genuinely welcoming, others gave me looks that hinted they knew more than I did. One lady, clutching a knitting project, whispered to me with a conspiratorial wink, "You're going to love it here, dear." I laughed nervously, pretending not to notice the odd feeling in my chest, the feeling that I wasn't just visiting. I was expected. Then we approached the receptionist desk again, where Julia handed me a small card. You'll need this for room 302, she said casually, like it was the most normal thing in the world. My laugh died in my throat. Room 302? I hadn't even agreed to move here. I looked at David, who avoided my gaze again, fiddling with his hands. That smile of his was now almost smug. I tried to convince myself I was overreacting. Maybe it was coincidence, maybe the home had mistaken me for another Mary Thompson. But then I saw it, a small board with photos of new residents, and there I was, my smiling face staring back at me. I froze. My own photo. My own information. It was real. I swallowed hard. David, what is this? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. But he didn't answer. Instead, he guided me further down the hall, and the weight of the situation pressed on me. I realized then that this tour was no ordinary visit. Something much bigger, and far more calculated, was unfolding. And then, just as I was about to confront him again, the director appeared. Then came the moment that made my knees feel weak. Julia, the receptionist, handed me a thick, glossy welcome folder. I took it hesitantly, my hands trembling ever so slightly, as if opening it might shatter the world I thought I knew. On the front was my smiling photo, my full name, my date of birth, and a neatly printed schedule of activities. There it was in black and white, my life already mapped out without my consent. I laughed nervously, trying to brush it off. This must be a mistake. I didn't even pick out my own lunch this week, let alone sign up for a whole retirement program. David didn't say a word. He looked anywhere but at me. And that smile, oh, that infuriating, smug smile, refused to fade. My mind raced, trying to piece together how this could possibly happen. Could it have been a clerical error? Was there another Mary Thompson in town? My logical side fought my gut instinct, but deep down, I already knew the answer. That's when Mr. Howard, the director, stepped forward. Mid-50s, calm, collected, but with a certain authority in his voice that made the situation feel even heavier. Good morning, Mrs. Thompson. We received the deposit yesterday, he said casually, as if discussing a dinner reservation. My stomach lurched. Deposit? But I didn't, my voice faltered. I reached for the contract lying on the desk, and the moment my eyes fell on the signature, my heart skipped a beat. It wasn't mine. At first glance, it looked familiar, almost my handwriting. But the loops, the slant, the faint pressure points told a different story. Someone had forged it. My own son. I stared at him, searching for any sign of remorse, but all I found was satisfaction, the kind you see in a person who's proud of a perfectly executed scheme. How could you do this? I whispered, shaking, my voice trembling with a mix of anger and disbelief. David finally looked at me, but he didn't answer immediately. Instead, he gave a half-smile, a shrug, and said softly, I thought it would be better this way. Better? Better for whom? I felt a flood of emotions, betrayal, confusion, even a strange flicker of fear. And as I stared at him, trying to understand his reasoning, I realized the situation was far from over. There was more to this, something he hadn't told me yet. And just when I thought I might finally get an explanation, he leaned closer and whispered something that made my blood run cold. I braced myself, ready for David to offer some ridiculous excuse, some selfish justification for what he'd done. But when he finally spoke, his voice was calm, almost pleading. Mom. I did this because I was worried about you. I blinked. Worried? My stomach churned with a mix of anger and disbelief. Worried? I repeated, my voice sharper now. You tricked me. You forged my signature. And you call that worry? David's eyes softened, and for the first time, I saw something real behind that infuriating smile. I've watched you struggle these past few months, Mom. The stairs, the doctor visits, the loneliness. I thought, if I made it easier for you, if I did it first, you'd be safe. You'd still have some freedom, but you wouldn't be alone. His words hit me like a punch. I wanted to hate him for what he'd done, but part of me knew he spoke from a place of love, even if misguided. Mr. Howard watched quietly from the doorway, nodding as if this was part of a daily routine. Julia, the receptionist, gave me a sympathetic smile. I glanced back at the welcome folder. Room 302, activity schedule, medical support, new friends waiting, it was all laid out. My independence had been compromised, yes, but there was an undeniable upside. A sense of safety I hadn't realized I needed. I sat down in the small lounge, my hands gripping the armrests as I tried to process everything. Do you even understand how manipulative that was? I asked, more to myself than him. David nodded, quietly. I do. And I'm sorry. I just wanted you to be okay. My mind raced, torn between fury and gratitude. Could I forgive him? Could I accept that he'd taken such an extreme step out of love? Humor bubbled up despite myself. I shook my head and muttered, I've spent 68 years avoiding tricks from anyone, and now my own son manages to outsmart me completely. David chuckled nervously. I caught a flicker of pride in his eyes. He had been waiting for me to realize the truth, waiting for me to see that, in his twisted way, he had tried to protect me. And then he asked the question that would make my next choice impossible to ignore. So, are you moving in? I froze. My heart pounded, my mind spinning. Was this betrayal? Or opportunity? Safety? Freedom? Love? I didn't know yet. But the answer I gave, and the moment that followed, would set the course of my life in a direction I had never imagined. I took a deep breath and looked around the room, at the residents, at David, at the life that had been carefully mapped out for me, without my consent. And in that pause, I realized something terrifyingly beautiful. Sometimes, the very thing that feels like control being stolen from you can turn into something life-changing. I sat in the lounge, staring at the room around me, the sunlight spilling across the floor, the faint hum of conversation, the smell of freshly baked bread from the kitchen drifting in. My mind was a whirlwind, anger, disbelief, relief, and a strange sense of curiosity all tangled together. David watched me quietly, waiting for my decision. The truth was, part of me still wanted to storm out, to reclaim the independence I thought had been stolen. But another part of me, the part that had spent months quietly worrying about being alone, realized something I hadn't expected. Maybe this wasn't entirely a trap. Maybe it was an opportunity. I looked at the residents around me, some laughing over cards, some quietly chatting, some tending to small gardens. I saw what I had been missing in my day-to-day life: community, companionship, care. And I realized that David's deception, as manipulative as it had given me a chance I might never have taken on my own. I shook my head in disbelief. I can't believe you pulled this off, I muttered to him, a small smile creeping onto my face. You've outsmarted me completely. David smiled, relief flooding his features. I just wanted you to be safe, Mom, he said softly. I studied him, still wary, still feeling a flicker of betrayal, but slowly letting it fade. Sometimes love is messy, complicated, and even a little sneaky. Sometimes the people who care most will make choices you don't understand at first. But that doesn't mean they don't have your best interests at heart. I took a deep breath and finally made my choice. I would stay, but on my own terms. I would participate, engage, and enjoy the life that had been laid out before me, but I would not give up the independence I had fought for my entire life. This was the irony of the situation. I had been tricked, yes, but in doing so, I had discovered a part of life I hadn't realized I was missing. As I settled into my chair, I looked over at David, my mischievous, clever, frustrating, and loving son. You'll have to try harder next time, I teased, and he laughed. That moment, light, human, flawed, real, felt like the perfect end to a chaotic morning and the start of something unexpected. So, I turn to you, the viewer. What would you do if someone you loved made a huge decision for you, without asking? Would you fight, forgive, or try to understand? Comment below, I want to hear your thoughts. Life is unpredictable, and sometimes, the very thing we resist may turn out to be exactly what we need. And just like that, what started as a trick, a betrayal, and a shock turned into a lesson in trust, love, and the messy, complicated beauty of family.